land trust's position on the relocation of the highway?
Yeah, that's a great question
Because
because
it's through this
obviously,
area, right?
Mhm, yeah. So, so I'll say that the highway realignment project that's happening, I'm not as familiar with because I, again, admit that I was not tracking on it as well until I became involved with the land trust. We don't necessarily have a position because our property is not in the line of the realignment as they're determining the option that they're going with now. However, we are working with Idaho Transportation Department and neighboring landowners to be able to at least try to act on the fact that we want to make it as least impactful on these prairie remnant ecosystems as possible by selecting species for some of the roadside revegetation that are native and have a little bit more of a potential to reestablish without bringing in a lot of weeds and invasives. And so the way that I see it, it's hard to be in a political position as our land trust doesn't necessarily sign on to getting behind really kind of hotbed issues. However, I'll say that we are very much at the center of the conversation of making as much a conversation as we can with the parties that are involved to lessen the impacts. So I hope that has a little bit of context there. But yeah.
That's good to know it's not going right through the middle of it or something. That was, I was just curious.
Yeah, I think, and I'll point at David and say that David can answer questions about this much better than I can because he's been long involved. But I believe that when they were selecting the path, they did have to go through a federal permitting process that required an environmental impact statement to be done. So they had to understand where the core areas of Palouse Prairie were at, and they also had to understand where some core culturally sensitive areas were, places that might have had some artifacts or remnants from native cultures using them. So I think that they've had to have crossed that bridge already in their planning process, but I'm less familiar and will de facto to another person in the room who is kind of at the core of that group, so, or at least understands where the transportation department has gone through the necessary hoops. So, so I just will close by saying that we definitely are very much part of a national network, and we work regionally here with several partners. We're members of a couple of different associations that really help bring power and policy movement to our work. So we're a member of the Washington Association of Land Trusts. The executive director there is Nick Norton, who was formerly on our staff. And Nick is at the center stage of conversations that bring strength to the work that we're doing, and also making sure that we're advocating for policy and funding at the state level that helps us have momentum in this work. For example, on the Washington side, there's a legislature has a pot of funding called the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program, WWRP, and that is designated legislative budget dollars that come down to acquisition projects for private land conservation. On the Idaho side, we're members of the Idaho Coalition of Land Trusts, and we also have a person who sits at the state capitol and is helping to, when we have the when the legislature is in session, they're keeping their ear on the beat on things that will impact our work and advocate for us. We only have a part-time executive director in Idaho, but we're hoping to be able to expand on that in the future. But it really is interesting to be able to see how the examples from other land trusts are, that we're able to bring those messages back to other landowners that we're working with, because there's a lot of really, really important and empowering work that's happening in the land trust community. And we're really super proud of that. And I'll just also wanted to close on saying that this is a map of the blue dots represent a conservation easement. This is a national conservation easements database. And nationally, we, land trusts and other entities across the country, like the Nature Conservancy and the Trust for Public Land, have protected almost 28 million acres of land that's in private hands. And just to put that into context, that's just a little bit over the land area of the state of Idaho, which is about 57 million acres, and about equal to the amount of land throughout the nation that's in the national park system. And so the tool that we're using, these conservation easements, is certainly having an impact on private land conservation and protection. And I'll also point out that the core of this work really started in the eastern United States. Many of these land trusts have been in operation, some for almost 70 years, but many that are probably much more mature than some of the ones out west. And then you'll also see, this is Colorado here, and around the Rocky Mountain front and the Denver area where the land trust movement really took hold in the 90s and early 2000s. The areas where you'll see kind of hotspots are areas that have some oftentimes have a source of dedicated local funding. Idaho is one of only 5 states nationally that has no dedicated funding mechanism at the state level. So accordingly, you'll see that some of the areas in our state are a little bit sparser, and that's because of the nature of some of that work. There are a lot of communities across the nation that have worked really carefully and wisely to really embrace this sort of grassroots movement to fund local bonds or other funds to be able to help leverage this type of work. And so there's a lot of momentum when a community is really seeing sort of unfettered growth.
I think one of the states, Minnesota.
Yeah,
It's huge.
Yeah.
That is a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's likely because
The
there
headquarters
is some
of the-
dedicated open space funding there.
Mississippi.
Yep, yeah. So, so that's just kind of an overview on the national landscape. Again, land trusts are very locally led, so we're the local entity that serves this broader Palouse region, but we're part of a kind of a broader movement of work across the nation.
Well, Idaho has so many acres of public lands. There probably isn't a need for that.
Yeah,
What
so
you're doing.
good point. So Idaho is about roughly half public land base, but the other half is all in private hands, and there's some ownership. Obviously, Idaho Department of Lands, our state entity, owns several million acres, but the private lands that are owned, especially in some of the areas where we see a lot of core wildlife habitat, is these private landowners are the ones who are providing that value to the rest of us. And so it's been really, really wonderful to see some big, huge acreages of like large ranch properties and large forested properties across the state that have come under this conservation easement umbrella for the purposes of protecting that space for public recreation, whether it's hunting or hiking, but also in terms of connecting these wildlife corridors in the state. And I read an article in the paper recently, the Idaho Statesman, about there's a professor at Boise State University who's going to be speaking at the Ag Summit this year, and that the whole focus of the Ag Summit is on farmland preservation, which is what land trusts do. And what's happening in the Treasure Valley, especially around Boise and Meridian and Caldwell, Nampa, and all those areas where the farmland, the acreage that's being lost is really, really drastic. And the American Farmland Trust recently released a publication that states just how, kind of quantifying how much states are losing the farm ground, and especially in these areas that are more subjected to urban sprawl. And I always try to point out, we're a smaller community up here, we're not Boise, but in Whitman County, in the last 10 years, the growth rate has been over 14%. And in Moscow, lags a little bit behind that because we don't have as high a population, but certainly we're in the double digits. And so it's just a matter of time before we'll see it happening to us. And then up in the Camas Prairie, just north of Post Falls and Rathdrum, they're projecting I surely won't get the figure right, but I know that it's somewhere in the realm of like a doubling of their population in the next 10 years because of people moving to Idaho, to seek the quality of life that we can offer, but just in terms of the bang for the buck that they can get in value of selling a home somewhere else and coming here. So we're seeing lots of growth happening, and so it's important that we have an educated voter base to be able to help with telling that message to our political leaders. And so in terms of just, again, I just wanted to touch on our national accreditation. Again, we're a nationally accredited organization. We're actually going through re-accreditation this year, 2020. And just wanted to leave you with some things that you can walk away with just in terms of being involved, and certainly talk to your legislators about the importance of open space and in offering private landowners an option to keep these working lands in working hands. But certainly voting is the way to have the most impactful grassroots impact. So I'm going to just wrap it up there. I've kind of gone on a little bit longer